Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 9.11. And of course, you're playing as Germany. And let me just, it's really helped in the past. If you would just all now, right now, hit the like button. Doing that really sort of helps the YouTube algorithms. I'm facing enough problems with YouTube as it is. Some more like button stuff will really help. So thanks so much. Okay, we got these guys here. You got them up here. Rebase. Looks like my artillery is here. Good, they even made it on the right one. The faster one. Come down here. Okay, and we've got Batavia. Okay, you stop advancing into Batavia now that we have Batavia. Naval air targeting has advanced. Okay, yeah, we'll let that continue. Okay, Hitler requests more Bulgarian occupation troops for Greece. The fall of Sigmund took over occupation duties in northern Greece to replace German forces' critical areas. Excellent. We need this. Okay, I guess so. Since it doesn't look to be a negative thing, we'll take that. Increase Polish resistance. Home army. Okay, this really should have a check for war with the Soviet Union. I mean, obviously we can deal with this, but this is just a BS event right at this point. Okay, and looks like everywhere there was an outbreak of Polish resistance, we had troops. No, I didn't, other than simply I'm putting troops on IC centers and similar sorts of things. Had no forewarning really about that. And Danzig, either way, that's too German of a city at this time frame, I think, to have any real Polish outbreak of resistance. Not saying there weren't Poles or, you know, Polish patriots or whatever there. In fact, I think there were. It just was rather a German city, if you know what I mean. Yes, we're going to win all those battles. Carrier damage control, great. So we'll have less damage when we get attacked. Yeah, we'll let that continue. We don't want getting a lot of them, and we don't want them. Damage carrier aircraft prototype has advanced. Again, that's good, and we're going to let that go. Okay. I'll keep holding the wrong button down. Go like that, and stop. Go to here. Rebase to there. And did get a bunch more transports, or convoys I should say. Batavia. Oh, and we could also do Makes it come from there to Calcutta. Make sure we have enough supplies flowing. And we've won again the Battle of Johannesburg. Okay. We'll grab this police station. We'll come up. Take their last port for supply away from them. Uh-oh. And we're now fighting Nepalese troops in Nepal. Finland, we give them fuel. Yes, yes, you may have fuel. Okay, well, now that we have this, okay, you know what we're gonna do here is rebase to there. You come back to here, I think. Just get them out of the supply chain here. Not sure. And as soon as we can, we will see about improving things there. You guys get out, and you guys fly back to Germany as well. Get repaired, reorganized. We're sure striking a lot in here, but we're cutting off their operations. Looks like we're doing that well. Increase Polish resistance again. Oh, lovely. Again, that shouldn't be happening. Yes, 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 yes. We lost Phelps earlier on. Okay, you'll make a fine commander for Prince Eugen. There's Phelps. So let's unify our Waffen-SS command here in... Oh, you may be too far away. Nope. Good. And Totenkopf can join that. Probably IK out ranked him. There we go. Now we have a Waffen-SS corps. 2 mountain divisions, a cavalry division, and Totenkopf, which is basically an armored division now. Yeah, Panzer division. Didn't know if it's still officially being called a Panzer Grenadier unit or not. Okay, we're gonna need some more of those garrisons. Those will help us out. How many did we get? Oh. And need more destroyers. Increase again in Polish resistance. Okay. Well, they're bombing us, trying to deal with us. Smart of the AI, I guess. And, well, we do have an air base here. So, and I think we have some relatively recent fighter squadrons that aren't being assigned to anything yet. Okay. You guys fly down here and give us some air cover. Okay, now that's doing fine. No, you're not. You stop. Okay, that's doing well. Yes, we're winning all our battles in Poland. Now, it was some time ago, and I'm just actually now sort of remembering it, thinking about it. You guys can come down here. There. Talked about my plan to defeat Britain. And I guess I've been, in a way, doing it for a long time. And Vincent, a long time viewer, talked about, asked me if I thought, what is it, Raiders, Mediterranean First Plan, if that would have won the war. And yes. Well, no. Would have, no. Okay, no. Sorry, excuse me. Got to be clear about this. Would that have been able to defeat the British? Well, I do believe it would have defeated the British in the Mediterranean. Had, instead of going after the Soviet Union in 41, had you focused 41 in securing the Mediterranean. And that would include you could have continued a reasonable war, air war against Britain itself, the island of Britain. Certain amount of bombings, certain amount of convoy and other naval interdiction by air power. When I say a certain amount, and this is like through the year 1941. Not necessarily like so much to overwhelm them, but nothing, and it can vary at times. And so if every day all your bomber force is out there trying to engage convoys just before they reach port, okay, that's going to overwhelm the system and they can concentrate on it. But if occasionally a lot of bombers, like HE 111s or whatever, lighter bombers, heavier bombers, whatever, were to periodically, once they identify a convoy in reasonable location, were to come out and attack them, Britain would need to have fighter coverage ready to intercept them, would need to have more anti-aircraft guns just put on standard freighters, which means gunners have to be there, presumably Royal Navy personnel, more escorting ships with anti-aircraft guns as opposed to more escort ships with anti-submarine weapons. Now, of course, you can have ships that do both, but a lot of, like, the American destroyers, they just had their depth charge racks. Once that was empty, they were out of depth charges. So, there's still submarines on there. Well, what can we do about it? Well, you can either have more racks or more storage, to reload the racks or whatever. But if you go, we have to have lots of anti-aircraft guns. Well, you got to have the deck space for the anti-aircraft guns. You got to have the storage space for the ammunition, and for their crews, you've got to have living space and food storage space and all of this stuff. So a destroyer is sort of can do everything kind of ship, but they only do so much of everything. And the more you stick on it, even if the weight and whatever doesn't really affect them, it still limits things. So periodically now, of course, we can talk about the long range. They were a mixture of attack aircraft and reconnaissance aircraft, the Condors, and they were weak bombers because partially that because of the long range, they were designed to go transatlantic one way, and they were really lightweight, so they were weak in the physical sense. A fair number of them just cracked up on landing. Because they, be stressed out. So you can't carry a lot of bombs on them, partially to keep the range up. Maybe you could put bombs on them, but you'd rather have fuel, to go longer. But even structurally, they weren't that strong to have very many bombs on them. So, but they were good, relatively good reconnaissance aircraft. And, the sort of light bombers, even though they're 4-engine aircraft, they, light bombing as in, they're weak, so you don't want to do any dive bombing or come in and get any aircraft hits, because, they just don't have the redundancy of systems. So, they can do some stuff, but, so if you spot a convoy coming in and then you could launch out of somewhere a raid on that convoy and, a bunch of bombers, that's great. And so you do some of that to force the British to prepare for it, and then sometimes you bomb their ports, and sometimes you bomb factories, and sometimes you bomb air bases, and sometimes you bomb army bases, and you just keep shifting around so that the British are, what the hell is going to happen next? They don't know. And sure, of course, a certain amount of, fighter command can shift around, but functionally, if you got a lot of fighters down here and you've launched sort of longer range bombing attacks against even the west coast of, sort of Scotland, when you know that, whether submarine spies or other reconnaissance aircrafts spots an incoming, because a lot of times they came in this way, but sometimes they would come maybe down here, but coming in here, you could fly, and they did do several raids or major bombing stuff coming out of Norway, but come down here, you don't necessarily know that they're coming until they get to, say, here, and these fighters don't either have the effective range, fighter range, or just the time it takes them to rebase and get up. The raid is gone. So if you've concentrated all your fighters down here, you can raid here relatively easy. And the British, have good intelligence, but not perfect intelligence. You don't know if you've just moved 2/3 of your bombers up here to get ready to possibly go after a convoy when one could be, once you spot one, you don't know, and you keep shifting around. And of course, if you haven't spotted a convoy, you bomb some Glasgow based shipbuilding or something, and so you keep moving stuff around. You keep doing some of that to keep Britain sort of tied there, but a massive amount of air power, of fighters, of bombers, of reconnaissance, of transports could have been poured into the Mediterranean to do everything more. You could have easily built more ship transport types in Italian ports, but have German workers, German components being brought in to build them. Your torpedo boats, even definitely your Rams boats, your sort of your motor torpedo boats, the PT type stuff. Definitely build a bunch of those kinds of things quickly down in the Mediterranean in a realistic sense. And you don't need a whole lot of all that other stuff if you're flooding your zones of operation with lots of German air power. You want some, but you don't need lots. And so you could have secured, I think, the Mediterranean up. Now, once the Americans get in, if, say, they they enter the war in December 41, with the Mediterranean fully land or secured, I don't know how well, whether you actually get Gibraltar or not. I don't know. I don't know how practical that would have been for the Germans. Obviously, yes, they could have invaded Spain. But I don't think Gibraltar is worth invading Spain. I don't know if they could have pressured Spain either into joining or allowing the Germans to somehow. I think that would have just caused them to enter the war. I don't know if the Americans would have attacked neutral Spain if they needed to get access to the Mediterranean. But I think you could have occupied, without occupying Vichy France, I think you could have easily secured some good, Africa Corps type divisions here and a few up along here. And you really, I don't think, if you've taken Malta, if you've taken the Eastern Mediterranean prior to the America's entry into war, you really can't. And especially if you have lots and lots of German air power, I don't really think you can invade too deep into the Mediterranean here, in a practical sense. Because it's not just like, oh, well, we have this big convoy with lots of, battleships and carriers, destroyers and everything, escorting in a bunch of troop landing type ships. Yeah, okay. And you land here in Tunisia, you land somewhere in Libya, even land in Italy. How are you going to daily ship in more supplies to keep that going? See, that's the question. You need to come and attack someplace like out here so that you can then land base your aircraft. I mean, a simple thing like that. And once you do that, then you can start, effectively. Gibraltar does have a runway, does have the ability to base some aircraft, but it's really tiny. Effective, okay, so we can have a fighter squadron kind of thing. See, if this was realistic, it would just be like this maxed. You know, if you could just say this province could max have 1 air base or 2 air bases, that would be sort of the max physical capabilities of it. So you need to get more. Had the Germans occupied in some of these places, you know, what are the Americans going to do? They're not prepared in 42, in my opinion, to invade continental Europe on a, you know, place that would have a large front. It would be one thing to say, you know, oh, we're invading the Peloponnese, or, you know, Salonika down here, some sort of narrow front to create that. And I guess in that sort of vein, you could invade, you know, Brittany out here and have a narrow front kind of thing, but that just becomes a greater Gallipoli, you know. So I really don't think the Americans, and definitely don't have that capability when you're at peace with the Soviet Union. So up until the beginning of the campaign season in 42, if that's when you're invading, which is about the time you're starting to have an American possible response in a practical sense, mid 42 at earliest, if they're coming in 41 at the end of December. So, you know, if you're going along, the Americans are going to go, you know, okay, yeah, we're at war with you, but what can we do? You know, and so if it's, let's just say it's May or June, you're going to invade the Soviet Union. So if they have no inkling that they think that there's a, you know, socialist alliance, national socialist, international socialist, uneasy alliance, they're going to be planning for that. So I don't think they could see a continental invasion. Maybe they would have looked at Norway, maybe. So they would have been, I think, operating down here, depending on how far the Italiano-British or Italiano-German forces either sweep into Arabia and or push down the Red Sea. They definitely, the Americans would be invading / reinforcing operations here, in my opinion, because I just don't see in a 42 time frame Germany getting anywhere near South Africa. So that's a safe base to move supplies through. And so here you have, I think, just one railway coming through here, and so you would be having, say, Rommel fighting Eisenhower, Patton, whatnot here, but that would be a very different fight than what was going on. And so, and if you look at one of the reasons I see Spain not being, the Americans I could maybe see thinking, wow, if we were to invade Spain, Spain just doesn't have much of a military. We can come in and hit it with hammer blows and pound deep into it and take it out. As you can see, your 10 divisions, it looks like, of British forces, probably 10 division, so 20 divisions of British forces. Yeah, I could see that kind of thing. 20 divisions looking like we can invade and get ashore, capture ports and supply them before you can see any realistic German reaction. But the terrain in Spain, you know, you're sort of getting a nice defensive wall here. You've got all kinds of stuff. It's not that easy of a terrain to take. So I can see the Germans potentially holding against the Americans for a considerable time. Does that mean they defeat Britain? I don't know, especially once you get in the Americans into the war, whether the Germans will have the industrial and technological abilities to stop America being able to feed and militarily support Britain, keeping it from being invaded. I think the Americans could achieve that. So short of slinging nuclear weapons at each other, I don't know that Germany can defeat, as in invade and take Britain, especially once America is involved in it in a realistic sense, especially while there's a Soviet Union that you're worried about. So this is sort of what, getting back to my strategy to take down Britain, is that if you can secure the Mediterranean, and then instead of driving towards London, you drive towards what supports them. Well, Iraq, oil, India, all kinds of economic aid is happening through India. India has the largest all-volunteer army of World War II. Everybody else, to get anything this size, has to be drafted. And India is obviously, doesn't look like this. It's a patchwork at this time of independent, semi-independent states, of direct crown colony stuff. It's an all kinds of a patchwork of stuff that's politically. So, there's parts of India that aren't ruled by any European colonials, at least not in a real direct sense, and at least the local Rajas or whatever claim independence. Now, that doesn't mean, if they start behaving badly, the British won't come in and do something about it. But as long as they behave good to a British standpoint, they're independent, and they truly are. It's just, you can't, go to some of the Hinduistic extremes, shall we say, and if you're some sort of crazed tyrant or something, they may come in. They may not. They may come in and get rid of the crazed tyrant and put his cousin on the throne or something like that. They're really good. And as Ed Hind, friend and viewer of the channel, will tell you that he's Indian. Well, and very much an Indian nationalist. Well, tell you that the British were great at divide and conquer, and so that's part of the whole thing. It's divide and rule, divide and conquer, and they did a great job of it. So you have armies in India that are loyal to a particular local Raja, and they may or may not have some British advisors on the staff, but they're not part of the Indian army as the sort of sub-army of the British army. They're their own sort of armies. And so there's all these kinds of different states, and some were basically disarmed, some were much more militarized. Do we have somebody? Yeah, we'll just send you up to there for the fun of it to occupy that. And you can come down there to occupy that. And you guys are going to come up here to help us take these mountainous regions. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on in India. But there is also so there's a significant army here, and so to take Britain, you need to weaken it, and so take out India. That's a significant theater. Japan takes out this part. If you take out here, yeah, there's some African units. Some did actually make it to serving in Europe. Most weren't in Europe. And a lot of them served in like the Ethiopian counteroffensive campaign. You have that. Let me just save this. Be safe. You have that going on, but there's a lot of, like we can see down here, rare materials that are useful for Britain / Allied war effort, including some of the, I think, to make some of the nuclear weapons. They were getting some of the stuff coming out of Elizabethville. So, you have that. So if you can take that, you also, if you're doing this, we now have a relatively safe trade here with Japan. You can have German expertise coming in here to help with keeping the oil fields flowing. You can, whether oil flowing to Japan, oil flowing to Germany. You can have Germans showing up with all their radars not just a few sets smuggled into Japan to start trying to re-engineer them. No, you can send them full shipboard radar systems to stick on. The Japanese radar did have radar. It did get better over time, but even at the end, it really sucked compared to everybody else's radar, and that includes Germany's. But you could have been sending large amounts of German radar sets over. You could be placing German aircraft over here. German U-boats operating. We talk about the War of the Atlantic and how the German U-boats become sort of obsolete to the convoys, that with various sonar and radar and all that kind of stuff, that they're no longer effective. Put them out in the Indian Ocean. I think they're going to be effective, because the reason they are so ineffective is because the convoys, we got the air gap, and that gets closed, and then they've got all the major or some of the major convoys, maybe all of them, depending on how you want to determine it. Now they have an escort carrier, a CVE, with them, and so you got all this air power and all this kind of stuff. The U-boats become the hunted. They're no longer the hunters here, and that's because this is a relatively limited theater of action, and then you also have the secondary movement to the Mediterranean here, and so you're focused, okay, and you're focusing. You also have America dealing with its coastal water. So most of this, my understanding is most of the stuff going to Europe comes this way. It's not, obviously there's ships coming out here to Bermuda and whatnot, but it's not the main path. But again, you put naval air out here to suppress it, and that's why they take America takes the Azores and puts radar and air power and shuts all that down. So this is all becomes a death corridor. Well, even if at a given date this is still in Allied hands, you've got to build death corridors out here. It's going to take a lot of energy and effort to do so. So while that is starting up, that you're able to put your U-boats out here and around here. I think they can make it, even the standard ones, on a one-way trip, so long as that you have secure naval bases, and then of course you can start assembling U-boats somewhere in your Mediterranean lake that's an access lake to come out here. And they're operating here, they're operating out here. The Japanese never had any campaign to go after American transports with their U-boat or their submarines. A couple of times they sort of did end up wandering, and I'm sort of saying it that way, it wasn't quite wandering, and there's a couple of Japanese submarine captains that really sort of understood the idea that the real mission of the submarines should be to kill transports. But Japan's Navy was fixated to use their submarines to sink the enemy Navy, and we can get into that, and I will get into that in the next series. But in short, they saw the idea, and they were big believers in Alfred Thayer Mahan. So was the American Navy. They thought there was going to be coordination of the big American Navy. It's going to take off from U.S. bases here, and it's going to move towards Japan and defeat Japanese Navy and Japanese home waters. Oh, sort of like Alfred. We're sort of getting into the funny stuff. I'm just zipping all over the map, so it's increasing its thing. Sort of like the Russians did it, coming to relieve in the Russo-Japanese War and get up in the Straits of Tsushima. Japan sinks the Americans are doing stuff here. They're holding some territories down here. Very good. Sinks the Russian fleet. So they see that as going to happen again, and what they want to do is, as this sort of grand fleet is heading towards Japan, is to have layers of submarines picking off units as it's getting nearer and nearer and nearer. And so it's attrited, so by the time it gets into the Japanese home waters, it gets overwhelmed with the Navy, including the Navy's air power, and sunk. And yay, we won the war. That's what the Navy thinks is going to happen, and that's what they plan for, and that's their ideology. Of course, they see and do and realize and do target troop ships as they're doing landings and stuff like this, but there is no commerce raiding strategy. And even when there are sort of harassment submarines, I think we'll call them, operating along the California coast, especially very early in the war, they're, because, and get into this, they're constantly told to conserve ammunition. Not submarines, Japanese naval vessels are told to conserve ammunition. This is how bad the situation is. Japan is volunteering to start a war with basically every European power that is not aligned to it, that has any sort of possessions in the Mediterranean or in the Pacific Ocean. So, with the exception, I guess, of Russia, every other European power, so France, the Dutch, Britain, or, including, I guess I'm putting America as a European power, Western power, they're going to go to war with all of them, and they're worried about overusing shipboard ammunition for destroyers and battleships. Conserve your ammunition. That's how bad their situation. It's one thing to go, oh, we're being attacked. Well, okay. Sometimes you don't have a choice in the war because somebody attacks you. This is a war they start. Okay, so there's this overall conserve your ammunition. But even with all of that, a lot of the submarines I know are told, that are operating here, are told not to shoot their torpedoes unless it's a war vessel. Use your deck gun. So you got there's an American ship. Get up on the surface and use your deck guns and go away, once you sink the vessel. Now, the problem with that, or I guess the sort of bad understanding is, what's more valuable? The destroyer or the cargo vessel? In many ways, it's the cargo vessel's more valuable. So I understand the idea of conserving torpedoes. I do. And so instead of like, oh, well, there's a cargo vessel, shoot 4 of them at it, make sure we sink it. No, shoot 1. Make sure we hit it. They don't do that. And so they have this. And the Americans, particularly Admiral King, is just very worried that the Japanese are going to work to cut off supply lines to Australia. They never do. They never really work to do that. But he really think, because that's what they would be doing, even though they also are a Mahanian Navy tradition, but they understand commerce warfare, which is what they do with their submarines, is to try to sink. If it's like, oh, there's 2 vessels, see, this is what an American submarine off anywhere, there's 2 vessels. One is a cargo ship of any sort, and the other, say, is not a carrier, but let's just say a destroyer. A brand spanking new Japanese destroyer, or a cargo vessel. The Americans are, and because you're going to be able to have one pattern of torpedoes, and you might not sink it, and once they spot that you've been shot at, that destroyer is not going to be sinkable, let's say. You can get it by surprise, but once they know you're there, you're not going to be able to sink the destroyer. They're going to go for the cargo vessel every time. Because they sink all the cargo vessels, those destroyers don't matter, because the destroyers can't operate because their bases out here are taken away from them because they'll starve. They're going to sink the cargo vessel. Now, once you do that, then they'll sink the destroyers, the next time, if there's lone destroyers. Now, of course, if there's something really valuable like an aircraft carrier, yeah, they're going to go after the aircraft carrier, maybe the battleship, but they're going after the cargo vessel. So the American submariners, even though they're using fleet submarines, which are sort of not designed as commerce raiders, they're designed to operate with the fleets. That's one thing the German submarines weren't. They were commerce raiders. The Americans and the Japanese built fleet submarines designed to operate in conjunction with surface fleets. But the Americans also designed their submarines to operate in the Pacific, which is very great distances. which the Germans do have longer range submarines as time goes on, but they're not at first designed for all that. Okay, well, so even as the Atlantic convoys, even as the technology gets better and better and better, just the sheer size of the Pacific, just the sheer ability to be places, the German submarines would be very useful in the Pacific had they been brought in whatever, not just like ones and twos, which did sort of show up, but in 10s and 20s, and operated effectively in a commerce operation, raiding operation. They would have been effective in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean. So they would have been effective even with their technological deficiencies. And I mean effective in that not only would they sink enemy vessels, they would also get away. I'm not saying, again, all of them, because Americans were losing their vessels to the Japanese. It just happens. Some vessels will be sunk even if they're as high-tech as basically, as they can be. You're going to lose some. But they would have been effective. You got to be smart. You got to see, that's a big troop convoy. Yeah, that has a huge destroyer screen around them. We'll stay away from that. Go pick off some other vessels. Go shoot some other things. Or if there is a big convoy, we'll shoot a spread of torpedoes at our most maximum range and then get the hell out of here. Kind of thing like that. So had Germany and Italy been able to break out of the Red Sea and start operating into the Indian Ocean, you're changing things greatly. With that, I can see, and we've seen here, a southern invasion route of the Soviet Union, whether that's through Turkey or through Iran, even if it's through the Black Sea. I realize at some point the Italian fleet, especially if there is no British, no Allied anywhere down here, no allies. There's only the Soviet Union, especially if the Soviet Union is still at peace and technically allied or non-aggression pact with Germany. You show up with an Italian fleet here, I think the Turks are going to let them through, because Turkey doesn't want to be invaded, and realize if it's going to be invaded, it can probably survive a lot longer from a Soviet invasion across this rugged terrain versus the Axis coming towards its primary city of Constantinople, Istanbul, and then pushing to its lesser city but capital of Ankara. So it's going to allow, at that point, not necessarily join the Axis, but allow the Italian fleet to get into the Black Sea, which means that you can do significant Axis invasions. And I put it that way because it may be Italian, maybe German, or both. In the early phases of Barbarossa, so you're opening up a southern frontier, even if you're not coming through Iran. In the early stages, and so you can be pushing to at first cut off the oil and then move towards the oil here. So that changes things. So I can see that as Germany getting to a place short of nuclear weapons that keeps American power from invading continental Europe. Does that mean Britain's defeated? I don't know. And I don't know that, like I say, I think once you get America in there, I think America can keep Britain alive, and I think there becomes a stalemate. And I don't know what that world looks like. I don't know whether that's a hot war that sort of like mutually agreed to not bomb each other for, months and months at a time, direct bombings, and I don't know, or is that some sort of Cold War? We're at peace, but we're still sort of shooting at each other once in a while. The idea that all trade in and out of Britain is, at a peace, let's just say Britain's at peace. Britain has I don't know who India belongs to, whether it's independent, whether it's split between Germany and Japan, whether it's all Japan or whether it's all Germany, or whether it goes back to Britain. Because once Germany wins, yeah, sure, Japan, you can have an Asia empire. We want Britain to counterbalance whatever sort of Soviet Union, and maybe even counterbalance you. So yeah, maybe India goes back to Britain. I don't know. But whatever it looks like, Britain's still going to, shall we say, escort its trade convoys in a peaceful sense. And so if we ever even think we spot a submarine or an aircraft flying anywhere near us, we don't care whether we're at peace or not. We're shooting at it. No matter whose flag it is, we're shooting at it. And Germany may be like, hey, any unauthorized air coming into any of our territory, we're shooting at that too. So sort of a Cold War that, unauthorized, sure, you can have commercial air transport, maybe very limited. We're talking very Cold War, or warmish war. I don't know what you want to call it. And, if any fishing boats get too near us, we're going to snatch them up, or whatever it might be. And we're not talking a peaceful world. We're talking two armed camps looking at each other. And if anything gets too close, we're shooting. And that, doesn't necessarily spread beyond engagement zones, but that sort of kind of thing. I can see that keeping Germany from being defeated. Then you have, what's the next step? Nukes. That could be a very ugly world. Hitler was moving towards nukes. Allies are moving towards nukes. Hitler's not going to be a détente person. If he thinks he can get them, and he thinks he can use them and it's going to win, he's going to use them. So, yeah, the Allies need to use them to try to break into Europe. So it'd be a very ugly world had that happen. And even if you're some modern-day National Socialist and want to see Germany victorious, and like their ugliness, their we call them war crimes, but their national crimes may be a good term, often happening during war. But even if there's technically a peace happening, they're eliminating, killing off large population groups and trying to move east into holding eastern territories. Even if you like that viewpoint, which of course I hate, even if you like that, I don't think you'd like the reign of, and trust me, if they hadn't, they only used the 2 nukes early because they wanted to end the war, and so they hit 2 cities that hadn't previously been bombed to show the complete devastation, to bluff the Japanese that they could keep doing it. They keep those bombs so deadly secret, the whole program so deadly of a secret, and they knew about Germany's heavy water telemark tests development. I don't know that the Nazis, and I wonder whether the Nazis did know. And I say I don't think the Nazis knew that the American nuclear program. Stalin does find out because in the nuclear industrial complex, we'll call it that, because it's in several major locations, some in Tennessee, called the Manhattan Project, because some of the main technical stuff is done secretly in Manhattan, part of New York City. And of course there's some of the test stuff way out west. In the program there are some Soviet spies, communist types that are ideologically communist, and are working on it because they think it's going to be used to defeat Nazi Germany and save Sovietness, so that they think they're doing that, and so they pass the information on. And I'm pretty sure Stalin's told and acts surprised, but he already knows, before the bombs are dropped. But the Americans kept Vice President Truman from knowing about it. So this is how secret the program is. The Vice President of the United States does not know about the Manhattan Project until FDR dies and he becomes president, and then he's informed. This is how much of a secret it is. So I don't think Hitler's Germany or any of the other Axis people knew about the Manhattan Project, but the Allies definitely knew about Germany's nuclear project. So they would have kept this super secret, as secret as they could. And then all of the sudden, because they know how to use things, would rain down, not one, not two, but rain down a bunch of nuclear weapons, especially if they think the Germans have a project and have some. They would try to hit those locations to take out those storage of the bombs before they could be used, and they would rain down a lot of them. I don't know a number, whether that means 20 or 100 or whatever, but it wouldn't just been 2 or 3. It would have been a rain of them, and that would have been the shift in power, balance of power, and to a major offensive. So it would have been an ugly situation, and probably they wouldn't have gotten all the, unless Germany was so stupid that they had whatever nuclear weapons at that point. And the program is definitely, I've come to believe it's further along than I thought it was, but it was nowhere near the American speed of operation. Presumably, if Germany is peaceful, they can shift more resources into the nuke system, or even if it's not peaceful, but it's sort of stalemated war with Germany in good position, they could have put more resources, pushed along further, but probably would not. The Americans could have gotten more sooner, quicker, I think, than Germany could have. And unless the Germans were so stupid to put all of their eggs in one basket, in a literal sort of sense, and the Americans knew where it was, and strike it, even if it's an underground base, it's going to take, even if all the weapons aren't immediately destroyed, it's going to take days, weeks, whatever, to try to dig them out, and if they don't all just go up and are destroyed in the initial attack. So I'm presuming Germany would have some of them dispersed, so we would see some retaliatory strikes of a few nukes, against London or whatever. So it would have been ugly all around, but I think it would have been devastating for Germany, and then a massive invasion following up behind that. So yeah, I don't know that it would have worked out good for Germany in the end. Obviously World War II didn't work out good for Germany in the end, but, or you could say it did, because Hitler's Germany was going to still be a nightmare, even if it did, and so modern day Germany is a better solution than Hitler's, even if he won. So yeah, but so you could really change things had Germany did some different strategies. Hope that was interesting. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking the videos. I really do appreciate that. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Hey, if you made it this far into the video, you better have subscribed. And of course, please post questions, comments, suggestions, corrections. Love hearing from you. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.